Well, welcome, Ryan. Great to see you again. It's been a while since we've spoken.
Always a pleasure, Paul. Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Well, we do this every so often, about every 9 months when Microsoft do something like significant, or I'm scratching my head saying, oh, what's the implications of that? I usually call you up and we'll have a conversation like this about I feel it's about once every 9 months or so. So this time we're going to make it a little more public because others might be asking themselves similar questions to what I am thinking about. And so the obvious thing to do is get you on the phone and ask you a whole bunch of these questions. So this session's really going to be pitched at or ideal for decision makers, basically folks in digital or IT functions that are trying to make sense of the almost relentless avalanche of change that's happening to the industry generally at the moment. I think it's reasonable to say it's almost like an AI arms race at the moment. Just the pace of change is kind of crazy. But to the point, you at Build, the recent Build, you did a session, and that session for me was fairly transformational. You know, I haven't been impacted by a session like that for quite a while. But I think the session was called something like Building Agentic Applications. It was something like that. I don't remember the title, but it definitely wins the award for the title did not do justice to the stuff you were talking about. So without getting deep dive into features, if I recall, you covered Plan Designer, which I suppose is GA now, so people are definitely seeing that. Very impactful. You know, I see huge potential with that. Hopefully, we'll talk about that. But actually, I think the two key ones that you demonstrated was the generative pages. So the vibe coding for Power Platform, and I thought that was, and I'm on that preview and I'm working with it. It's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. I'm loving it. I'm taking apps that I wrote 25 years ago and literally putting the screenshots in and modernizing them, like pretty incredible. Then you also, but you weren't done. You also then demonstrated code pages, and where for the pro devs, now Power Platform is hosting applications that they've written that gives you all of the benefits of the connector framework and the governance and the policies and everything that's been built over the last 7 years to activate low code. I guess it's and for me, it's almost like Power Platform's just having this giant pivot because low code isn't the right word anymore. And so I thought, let's start there, and maybe you can take people through what your thinking process is and how the platform's evolving in your mind.
Those are great and big places to start, and I would say some of this is, the technology is evolving really quickly. Other parts of this is, the mission for Power Platform has always been shorten the distance between a human with a need and instructions to computers at huge scale. I think we're just really hitting our stride, and that technology change is actually enabling it at a much higher level. We've never loved the moniker of low code. Anytime you have to name a category with slashes and hyphens, you haven't quite hit the right language or you're apologizing for something, right? So low code, no code, citizen developer, right? These are terms superior technologists came up to make other people feel lesser. Fundamentally like pejorative terms at some level. We name people by what they're not or what they don't have. And that's like a classic tech thing to do. There was a while where Microsoft called people deskless workers, and then we realized, that's kind of offensive. Maybe we'll just call them frontline workers. But I think in the space of low code, really just all code is moving up the stack. All software is moving up the stack. Everybody with a job has the ability to make that job better. And that includes people who are professionally tasked with making jobs better and making software work better and deploying systems at scale. But it also includes people who have actual operational expertise on the ground of what better really looks like. And, you could say for the whole evolution of Power Platform, going back, more years than I'm proud to admit now, we've always been generating code based on natural human input. We just had a lot of stuff in between before. You had to drag and drop a whole bunch of boxes and arrows and express a bunch of things in very highly abstracted expression languages like PowerFX. And then we would go back and compile and generate code. And what ultimately ran in your browser was, in fact, code. It was just generated deterministically, and it had a whole bunch of stuff in between the human and the running code. What this latest generation has allowed us to do is actually cut a lot of that stuff out and just generate better code more efficiently with much more open-ended forms of input. And that, I think, just allows a much wider aperture of ambition of what we can make better at work.
Absolutely. And so a question, the pejorativeness of low code is interesting because it's almost, it becomes a bit of an anchor that can drag you in the sense that you've now made an overt, explicit appeal to pro code. I mean, Microsoft always has. Sorry, I shouldn't say you. But now with the pro code side, like Code Pages, for example, I'm a non-pro developer. I don't even like JavaScript, by the way. I find it frustrating and think it's, you have to be a certain type of brain to deal with that stuff. I was able to use, but having said that, I was able to write a whole bunch of React TypeScript using GitHub Copilot within VS Code, and I was able to deploy and connect using their connector framework in there. So do you think, can you win the hearts and minds of the pro developers? Because I guess a lot of developers tend to think low code equals not flexible enough for my needs, or there's just something around abstraction, as you say, it's been there. JavaScript went to TypeScript, TypeScript goes to React, but there seems to be this line where a pro developer goes, no, I'm out now at PFX. And I don't know what that magic line is.
Well, that line shifts. Every major technology shift from, low-level assembly code in the 80s up to where we are now has come with a generation of people who have crossed their arms and looked at the new thing and said, you can't write real software in that. I'm not going to be in that. And then, oh my God, what will happen when amateurs write things in that, and what kind of calamity, or will I lose my job because now it's so easy to write in that? Every single time, more people have created more things, and we've created more abundance in the world. And so I think we need to approach change like real technologists. Don't fear change. They love it. They embrace it. They jump to it. And particularly real developers are fundamentally lazy at heart. They don't want to redo low-level things that they shouldn't have to waste time on. They want to put building blocks together and do the interesting stuff on top. And so that's why even for the last 5 years, you've seen actually a substantial portion of the Power Platform solutions that get built are built by people who self-identify as career professional software engineers, even while you have other parts of that same community sort of turning up their nose or resisting change. I think where that shifts in the next few years, though, if it's 2026 and your self-worth is still creating yet another SQL server from scratch and plunking out the schema from the get-go and then going and handcrafting yet another form over that data app, I mean, that's going to start to feel like canning really quickly. That's going to be like the artisanal thing you do on the weekend because it's fun, not really the way that the state of the art works in production of software code. So in a world where we're all pushed up the stack, we have to be really smart about what tools we do use and what trade-offs we make between productivity and control. And that's, again, always been the case. And it's certainly been the case for the last generation of low code. Where it becomes a more interesting and less, I would say, abrupt trade-off is now there are lots of tools on the market to generate code. And Power Platform is one of them. GitHub Copilot is one of them. There's lots of other third-party tools. New startups get funded every day. And you can start to see this really quick expansion of how quickly we can make stuff. The hard part of software has never been making the first page or prototype. That's not why people gravitate to Power Platform in the first place. The hard part is shipping it inside of an enterprise, having it be secure, having it talk to data, having it be reliable and work every single time. Going from 0 to 1 or your initial POC is always the easy part for any developer. It's really about what does it take to actually ship it and then repeat it and then do it at huge scale. And that's where, to your point, we've really matured the platform over the last 5 or 7 years, particularly the managed platform set of services, as well as the data platform and the connectors. And why restrict all of that just to things built natively in that platform? Why not allow people who generated code anywhere, whether it's in GitHub with agent mode or Cursor or any other tool out there, deploy to Power Platform and get the rest of that story that is much harder to vibe code in an afternoon. Real enterprise data connectivity, real data loss prevention policies, network isolation, sharing policies and limits, all that type of stuff is really the unsexy but existential part of deploying software, particularly in an enterprise context. And we just have built a very robust and high scale service for that serves tens of millions of users every single month and billions of dollars of business on top. Why not make that available to this much wider world of tools? Why have to force a choice in what tool to use? And that I think is a new sort of step for us, but it opens up just a whole lot of really interesting doors.
Yeah, and look, there are so many different pathways we could take from that statement you've made, and probably the one that makes the most sense, because I think you've hit on the nail on the head, is when you say managed platform. And I think that's a really interesting theme to explore, because I totally agree with you. I've been on the journey of Power Platform since the early days, and I've watched Microsoft respond to the challenges of democratizing to citizen developers. Let's just use that term for now.
Sure. Yep.
So policies, environments, groups, all of the governance tooling and managed, all of the managed stuff gives you a fantastic foundation. Now, what I'm seeing is the next bastion or the next, again, it's an abstraction argument. It's built on Azure, and you've described to me before, it's phenomenal, just the engineering on Power Platform, like when you provision the environment, just what gets put with the level of redundancy that's there. But you've still got Azure, and Azure allows you to build services and build capabilities. And there's still a cohort of developers who absolutely would instinctively gravitate to Azure. You've got Foundry, for example. And so what's your thoughts, or how do you position a managed platform for a wider audience of builders, from pro to business folks, where there's still an argument that someone would say, well, why don't we use Azure for that? So where do you think, where do you sit there?
Look, I'm a Microsoft shareholder. I hope people use Azure for things and continue to use Azure for it. I think people love to get caught in this trap of, it's a large tech company doing lots of things, they must be competing with themselves or sort of cannibalizing their own share. In practice, we've never seen that in Power Platform. Even for the last 7 years, Power Platform has been incremental in so many additive ways. And in fact, customers that add Power Platform end up consuming more Azure, not less, as a result, and vice versa when they use them together in practicality. I think if you look at it in this next era, though, we're really saying something much bigger than, like, if the whole question is about, here's this one use case, should I build it here or there? We're really missing the forest for the trees. I think the bigger picture is all of the software and all of the way we structure labor in our companies is about to be desperately out of date. We need to rethink all of it now. And if we don't, there's a company that got funded within the last 6 months or will get funded in the next 6 months that is going to come for us and do the rethinking for us. And okay, so if you zoom out from that point, you say every job function in this organization could and should be augmented by teams of digital coworkers and agents. What does it mean to be 10x more efficient and productive at the services we provide? 10x more impactful for customers? And then what does that mean for all of our current systems, which are just fundamentally not built for a world of that type of automation? That's a terrifying question. And then you look at that map and you say, okay, how many professional engineers and data scientists can I afford, and how many things can they do on an annual basis? And if you go look at, I need to go rethink thousands of operations and processes and functions and hundreds of pieces of software, either that I'm renting as SaaS or I custom built before. I need to do that in 3 years' time or less. How am I going to staff for that? And what kind of platforms am I going to use? I'm only going to be able to do so much at the bare metal level. And so I better be using that wisely. I better be taking on the hardest problems at that level. And I better be building things that empower other levels to go faster and aren't just chasing one thing at a time. I think there's a lot of customers right now asking, how do I build my first agent? And when they say agent, they really mean chatbot. That is a really short-sighted question to ask. It's like, how do you build your next 500 agents and 5,000 agents past that? You're going to need a platform. You're going to need a higher level of abstraction. And you're going to need professionals enabling that platform to succeed. And so that's really where Power Platform and Copilot Studio and even the M365 Copilot layer really coexist and are designed to build on top of things like Azure Foundry. I want my applied scientists post-training and fine-tuning a specific version of DeepSeek or Llama or OpenAI models specifically for my domain, and then making that available so that I can build a dozen or 100 agents on top of it in Copilot Studio and then consume them through M365. That's a way to get leverage and not have to rebuild everything from scratch as a full stack software project. So for me, it's not a versus. It's it's just a classic technical debt question. It's sort of like, where do you want to own the code? Where do you want me to own the code? Where do you want to be responsible for it for the next decade? Where do you want somebody else to be responsible for it? And there are valid answers on both sides of that question based on where it sits in the stack and how much leverage that asset provides to everything else that you do. But I ask customers this all the time when they ask me, should I build it in Power Apps or should I build it in Azure? I mean, I turn around and say, do you want to get the call in the middle of the night or do you want me to get the call in the middle of the night?
Good way to put it. Yeah.
It's a very simple question, but it's very clarifying because there are some things that, no, I do want to service that live site directly. I do want to own that IP directly. I do want to micromanage that asset. There are a lot of other things where I don't.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what a platform is for. Yeah.
It's like and so the way I'd characterize it is the number one question I get is similar to you. It's the when to use what.
Right.
So that's the question. And I sort of go back to a principle that I started on Power Platform with. So I don't know if I told you this story, but circa 2016, 2017, when it was all super beta, I built a little app. I handed it to someone who was a sort of a safety inspector, and basically looked at me and he said, "Is this platform any good?" And at that point, I was honest. I said, "I don't know.
I don't know.
But if you give me a few days and let's have a look. And what's the worst that can happen at the end of that period? We can take a functioning prototype that I've shared with someone, and then we can give it to the grown-up developers." And that was how we proceeded. And so that principle of let the platform prove itself, start there. And if you need to pivot away, it turned out it was very, very, very rare that we ever actually had to pivot away. So I see that sort of as a principle that probably holds true in this era. And I think, and I'll get you to speak to some of the tooling. If I look at Plan Designer as an example, and I'd be really keen for you to talk about your longer term ambitions for Plan Designer, but I'll tell you straight up how I'm using it now.
Sure.
Customers are loving it.
Cool.
Customers like the fact that you can have a conversation and produce something meaningful and iterate around requirements. And plus, the hidden thing is you are showing it's one of the few times where you can see an agentic future because you can look at the personas, the agents helping you.
You can really see them in the interface, interact with them there. Yeah.
Correct. So that principle of start with Power Platform is extremely powerful with Plan Designer at that end, because you can very rapidly test ideas, and if it was a bad idea, you throw it away, you have another go, so it suits that. But then you've got the rigor and the managed platform behind it that gives you the scale that you can, someone like me can confidently know that we can take this really, really far. So at the moment, that's probably not the long-term intent of it. It's very powerful. I think every PMO in the world should be, nothing should come through to get funded unless you've gone through a couple of Plan Designer iterations, for example. But let's talk about maybe where that goes further, and then I'll shift the conversation to the vibe coding a little bit as well. So let's start at Plan Designer.
I mean, this is sometimes the best innovations are not 180-degree innovations, they're 10-degree innovations, and I think it's very tempting for everybody in your LinkedIn feed to say, we're reinventing this and transforming that, and everything's going to be completely different. If we go look at where does software come from and why is it slow today? A lot of the stuff is not actually the software part. It's the human part. It's sort of, what does it mean to take all of the expertise out of a energy systems engineer or out of a financial comptroller or out of an HR person and put it in the head of a software engineer and hope that the right thing comes out the other side? And gosh, that's inefficient. It's really slow. But we have honed as an industry several really key practices for that process. You structure and think about the people involved. You think about the tasks they need to accomplish. You think about how those processes chain together and who does what across it. You think about the systems they need to interact with and the data they need to touch in the process. And then you ultimately think about a solution architecture and what type of things you need to build on top of that. It's just that often can take a year if you don't manage it the right way. So it's like, because it's a lot of human inefficiency, you have to write PRD documents, write RFPs, respond to RFPs, go to meetings, not go to meetings, reschedule meetings, like all that stuff is really slow. And it's a fundamentally iterative process too. You never go
Absolutely.
sit down and in a traditional software design process and, hit it out of the park on your first try, or go to one focus group and then instantly have everything. The process of building software is the process of writing words, sketching pictures, criticizing that work, changing it, building prototypes,
It's problem
criticizing prototypes.
formulation, right? It's
Absolutely,
problem
right?
formulation. Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of what we asked ourselves was, okay, how do we not actually try to, obliterate all of that, but how do we make it work faster?
Hmm.
And how do we start to emulate those patterns with really well understood examples of content out there? And then actually get to a place where we can just make that happen in much tighter cycles. Like, what if every professional developer and process expert in the world had the best and fastest software innovation team at their disposal 24/7, working over their shoulder? What a world could we build, right? When we start to do those things. And so that's really where plans as a concept came from. Like, we never build anything without a plan. We have to have a robust plan. Now, I would say there's other couple places that it's coming from too. One of them very practical, and another more, I would say, strategic. From a practical standpoint, one of the things we've learned the hard way by putting GPT prompts and chat windows and stuff in front of humans is that humans are actually generally very terrible at describing what they want AI to do. Um, we have this feature in Power Apps where you can type anything into a box in a running app, and we'll both filter a grid and produce a chart for you. Most people type one word into it. So it's like, okay, what am I going to do with that? And so some of this is very practically, we need to get people to go from very low fidelity input to much richer input so that we can generate more interesting artifacts down the line. That's why, as software people, we have these processes that we've built around human-centered design and requirements gathering. And so some of this is just really pragmatic. Hey, if we're going to generate better software, we need to go from an initial input and a prompt to a much richer plan. Let's go figure out how to actually do that with a team of agents and specialize agents in different parts of that work. And that's what we're doing today. Those are truly built and modeled as independent agents, and increasingly, really fine-tuned and post-trained based on real examples we see out there in the market to be optimized to be good at what they do. Now, the strategic aspect of plans is we're not just building an app anymore. Like Power Platform, historically, we just assumed you knew you wanted an app and then started you at a blank canvas and waited for you to build the UX. Or we assumed you knew you wanted an automation and then, gave you a canvas in which to express it. We're actually at a different point here. And we're saying, if we're really redefining labor as a partnership between humans and agents, and apps are the human interfaces and agents are the automations, we need truly a plan for that work. What part of a process will an agent do? What part of a process will a human do? How will they interact with each other? If we're going to build a good business solution, we have to understand the broader plan of work. And so that's the other motivating factor here. It's not just, can I build a cool UX that's fun to show at a conference, or can I solve the input prompt problem? It's also, if we're really going to deploy 500 or 5,000 agents into every company, we need to go orchestrate how they interact with humans and what processes they work on. And that's really the seed of what you see in plans today.
Yep. So it's really, and for those that haven't seen it, it really is something to see, because we've got the data agent that loves ER diagrams and builds out table structures, which is great and it's pretty good at it too. Some of our best data folks are like, that's how I would have done it. You've got the it's the requirements agent, isn't it, that basically works out the personas and the user stories. You've now got the process agent, which is particularly interesting because that starts to model business processes. By the way, exporting BPMN for other tools, there's a suggestion to put it in. But you're talking about the solution. I call it the solution architect agent, actually, but it's the solution agent that then starts to suggest, hey, this is the app we need and that sort of thing. So, and when you see them working together, it really, truly does. It's just a great way to educate people about what this agentic future looks like now, because you've literally
100%.
got these 4 agents helping you do this stuff. So from that, you then throw the curveball, or maybe not a curveball. I personally started using lovable.dev. That was where I started taking my old 25-year-old app that I wrote in VB6 that I always had ambitions to, do stuff with, never got around to it. Stuck it in Lovable, and in 5 prompts, I got a version of it, and then I ran out, and then I waited the next day and then used 5 prompts and finished it. And that was literally while I was having my morning coffee. Then probably, 3 weeks later, then out comes Generative Pages as a preview announced at Build. You demonstrated it, and then, you can imagine that I then sort of fell off my chair, but it all made so much sense. So now we've got this new agent. I can't remember its name. It's got a persona, but Generative Pages has got I think it's just a developer, I think. Maybe
call it like an app agent or a developer
app agent. Yes, sorry. App agent. So now for the folks that haven't seen that, what's the best way to describe these sort of tools? You literally just say, build me an app to do X. Here's a screenshot, or here's a bit of guidance, and it literally generates the TypeScript React and builds you a user experience. 100%. And it's all bound to Dataverse, which is the weakness of these vibe coding platforms. You're back to the enterprise integration that you started the conversation with.
Right.
Now, right now, it's a phenomenal demo. Do you see something like that as the future of how apps are going to be built on the platform? So we're not talking agents, we're not talking copilots here. What about PCF and Canvas apps? Where do you see all this sort of stuff going? Is it an alternate build pathway, or is it going to be the build pathway? What do you think?
I think it's early. Like, there's tens of millions of humans who use just Canvas apps in the last 28 days. Those aren't going to go anywhere anytime soon. But if you go back to where we started in the conversation, like Power Platform, we've been generating code for years. The input and output mechanisms have been very rigid up until now. We're now at a point where they can be much more fluid and open-ended. And I would say what a lot of tools got wrong, including Power Apps, in the early innings of generative AI, is we kind of just bolted a chatbot onto the right-hand side of the current thing and then tried to get it to orchestrate the current thing. And so getting a AI model to understand user intent and then figure out how to manipulate the Power Apps Canvas Studio to put the right button on the screen at the right time is actually a really hard problem, because the language model, for all it's ingested, is not deeply trained on how the Power Apps Canvas Studio works and how to manipulate a user experience. It has much more innate knowledge about how to just generate code directly. And so it became kind of this indirect problem where we're using really advanced models not to do what they're good at, but to manipulate the last generation's tool, and then we generate code based on that rigidity. That was a really hard problem. And quality is very variable there. Like, it's good at very small, micro tasks, but it's very hard at abstract tasks. Now, if you go back and you take even some of the same models, much less some of the tuning and post-training we've done, and say, okay, build me that same thing, but just write the code directly, skip all the intermediate steps, it's much, much, much better at it. Now, you still end up with the same thing at the end of the day. Arguably, you end up with something better that is based on less rigid primitives and more flexible and more performant. And that's a thing that, again, the mission of the platform is not, to have people build rectangles and code them in PowerFX. The mission of the platform is solve problems, build better software with every technology possible. That direct code generation is going to play a very important role in the future.
So, and totally agree with everything you said, and that the rationale makes so much sense. There's a couple of things that come from it. Our CTO in the company made the observation that agents probably, LLMs probably know more about JavaScript than they do React. And he said a similar thing, that you probably end up that these abstractions were created for humans, right? Human coders. And maybe, I heard a little bit of that in what you were saying, that, why generate PFX code when you can, it itself ends up as, I assume it's probably TypeScript, React behind the scenes. I'm not sure which framework. So I've had a bit of that was my big aha moment. I think, the vibe coding, the term that term has only existed since February, but the technology and the thinking behind it's actually been around for a bit longer than that. But it's an interesting story that, the term got coined in February, and by June, Microsoft's got a preview of, building it on Power Platform. Makes 100% sense. My instinctive reaction as I was building these things was, I was like, oh, wow, what's this going to do to SaaS, right? Because if you're a general purpose SaaS provider, I could almost vibe code 80% of what that thing does, particularly some of them are quite simple, with an integrated data model with Dataverse. And then I can back end that with the, the rich security model and all of the data governance, that's in place. So I'm really interested in what you think is going to happen in the SaaS world, but maybe to bring it back to organizations, what does this mean for build versus buy, right? What are your thoughts there of the future?
Look, I am not by any stretch of the imagination the most senior Microsoft person on record saying that apps, and particularly business apps as we've historically known them, are going to see a very violent, dramatic change over the next couple of years. Various versions of many other people, including our CEO, have said that too. So that's not going to be new news or a new proclamation. I do think I do think applications in general are very important to this future. The world is not going to go from our current state to fully lights out agent automation in a one fell swoop. It may never go there. Humans will need to interact with agents. They will need to manage what agents do. If I have an agent running critical banking procedures or critical operational procedures in an energy utility, I need to be able to spot check everything that it did. I need to be able to unblock it when it gets stuck. I need to be able to, give it input and train it and make it better. And chat is generally not a great interface for that. Chat is great for personal productivity. It's great for individual knowledge work. It's great for exploration, but it's not the only structured interface. If I'm a frontline employee in a grocery store, chat is not an ideal interface for me. Like, I need other structured interfaces too. So apps will exist, but the way we have gotten to apps in the last few decades has been either renting them off the shelf from somebody else, and that's the SaaS model, or building them bespoke with our own dev team or with a hired dev team. And that's the classic build or buy debate. That has always been a sort of false argument of two bad options. And I think if you
so it's rooted in a paradigm of what you described earlier, where what it typically takes to build, right? So it's
exactly. And so either, I'm going to build and get exactly what I need, but it's going to be expensive and slow to start, and then I'm on the hook to own and maintain it forever. And all those .NET apps that you hired somebody to build 10 years ago, did they get their .NET Core upgrade on time? Are they TLS 1.3 compliant? And so that's the challenge. And then on the build side or the buy side, I'm going to rent it from somebody who's a specialist, B2B SaaS developer. But that's just one little piece. And so, sure, it's somebody else's problem to go create it and maintain it. But now it's my problem that I have just one little unique butterfly that isn't really connected to anything else that I'm running.
Somebody else's cloud, not integrated into your enterprise systems, or those 100%. Integrations are,
100%. I talked to we have a person that recently joined our LT, a peer of mine that was at a startup before, who a startup founder who said, I drank the B2B SaaS Kool-Aid and I had all these products, and then someday I got a notification that my paycheck had been deposited, and it didn't even have my company's logo on it. It had that SaaS company's logo on it, and it was like we totally disintermediated the relationship between the company and the employees because we'd taken on so many of these point solution products. The real problem though is not that trade-off. It's you go add that up. The average corporate department, Gartner says, has 8 SaaS apps that they pay for
Yep.
dollars per user per month, and 7 more custom bespoke things and legacy things. And that's before you count all the other places where real work actually gets done, all of the fringe apps that orbit around it, all the spreadsheets that people dump out, all the low code stuff. And that's just one department. You go zoom out into every company. It's that all these build or buy decisions have built up this incredible debt of things that don't really play nice with each other, don't interact with each other, don't have a easy security boundary or security model. And that is a big problem.
Yep.
And so if you add to that, none of that software was built for an agent era. All of that software assumes manual human labor.
Yeah.
We have a big shift on our hands, and we have a choice. Either we can go re-modernize all that in the same way that we got into the mess in the first place, just rent it from a new crop of SaaS vendors or rebuild it with a new crop of pro devs, or we can make a choice to go get leverage from platforms at a higher level, and platforms that weren't available before. And that, you don't have to take my word for it. If you go look at where Forrester is on this, actually, John Bratton-Sevick is the lead low-code analyst at Forrester. And, he says, I expect, and we expect at Forrester, a substantial amount of the B2B SaaS market to collapse onto what they call app gen platforms.
Yep.
And that is, and basically squarely talking about what we're talking about here with Power Platform, because we've changed the economics of that build or buy calculation. I don't have to do that trade-off of, spend extensively to get exactly what I need, or give up what I need, but it's somebody else's problem. I can get exactly what I need, but I can do it on a fully managed platform that is somebody else's problem to keep running.
Yep.
And that, that is just a whole different lane here. And it creates a very interesting opportunity to go just drive a phenomenal amount of cost savings. One,
organizations move to SaaS because of tech debt, localized tech debt, if you think about it.
Yeah.
So they went, if we'll abstract that tech debt to a, per user, per seat, per month type of license, and we don't have to worry about that. But then as you zoom out and you do that more and more, tech debt creeps back in again, because now you've got these, disparate different SaaS providers that do things differently, that, have different mechanisms of getting access to the data and don't always play nice. And if you want to change it to something to your needs, basically, well, wait a year. That's kind of the paradigm. So what you're suggesting now, and if I bring vibe coding and plan designer back into the, with my principle at the start, is you could go, I have a hypothesis that we have a need of this. I wonder if Power Platform could do this. We could very quickly demonstrate and prove that hypothesis out quite quickly. And if it's actually looking good, you have to ask yourself, well, let's bring it back in again, because as you say, governance is sorted, network effects are there. Once you've got your policies managed, once you've got your integrations set up and abstracted via connector framework and things like that, suddenly you're in a position where you can, onboard a lot of your workloads back in again without any of the traditional tech debt that you dealt with. There's still some. I mean,
at least a lot
bring
less.
Data, but a lot less. Yeah. So you're now starting to narrow the focus down. It becomes really almost a data management type thing, I guess, right? As you,
One of the questions we've heard from customers for years in Power Platforms, give me an example use case. What's your use case? And a lot of times customers think they mean one specific app or example there. I think the use case is cut your SaaS budget by 25% this fiscal year.
Yeah.
Create constraint, and then go solve the problem with the best possible tools available. That's a very different question. It's sort of like drive modernization at 3 times or 5 times the speed you thought you were going to be able to modernize legacy systems with. Completely eradicate legacy platform X by this time next year. Those types of goals used to sound astronomically unattainable in the classic model of build versus buy. On a highly abstracted platform where I can make a robust plan for that software, execute and customize the code very quickly, deploy it to a highly managed platform with great network effects, it becomes much more tractable to reduce those costs and achieve those kinds of goals in a very short amount of time. And that's where I think the most sophisticated Power Platform customers are looking at this, is what substantial outcome can I drive? And frankly, cutting 25% of my SaaS budget is probably the least interesting version of that problem. It's sort of like, that's a very concrete, tractable problem of creating constraint.
Yep.
That type of thing then motivates a very interesting type of response. And that's why we're building all this stuff, Paul. It's not just because the tech is cool. It is. The reason why plans are important is because we do want to go ingest a whole bunch of existing software and workload and process onto Power Platform very quickly. To do that, you have to understand the purpose of the broader process. Then you have to be able to build out all the components, the data model, the integrations, the AI, and then you need to be able to customize the user experience of the apps. And then you need to be able to deploy it all really quickly at scale. That's the end-to-end that really matters. And that's really what all this stuff comes together to make possible.
Yeah. And you notice that in this entire conversation, we've spoken very little about Copilot Studio and the agent story, which is, of course, a massive part of the story. But
Absolutely.
I deliberately left it off because I wanted people to understand the more broader macro view of which it fits. And it's the same platform. For I guess folks who aren't aware, would it be fair to say that Power Platform is the service layer for Copilot Studio? It's probably almost most of the governance controls outside of data sources is going to be within the Power Platform.
Absolutely. Copilot Studio uses all the Power Platform connectors. It uses all the concepts of environment routing, sharing limits, policies, groups. When I deploy a solution of a Copilot Studio agent, it's the same solution that I put apps and Dataverse tables and everything else into, same pipelines from shipping from dev to test to prod. And so the cool thing is for Power Platform customers that are already using the managed platform and have already set up a lot of that, it's very easy to just add agents into that workflow. For customers that are coming at this brand new, Copilot Studio is not just something that somebody in a SharePoint list sort of starts using Agent Builder for. You can build real production software on it. You can iterate in dev, test, and prod. You can use proper software development lifecycle through. You can set great security policies around. It's a real robust platform, and frankly, we use it for some of the largest agents that we operate today in the world in the Microsoft scale. And we're applying it to our business too. So, in fact, it's even the underlying layer behind a lot of the agents that we have built into things like plans and Power Apps. So it just is a really powerful engine that we're using in context of the rest of Power Platform.
Yep. Well, so two threads on the Agentic one. So first, I'm wondering, so we have the app agent, which is our vibe coding assistant that basically punches out code. We've got our data agent that looks at Dataverse data models and can incorporate, quite complex data models. You've got our solution. Still, for me, it's the solution architect agent. Probably collapse the solution so it fits in the UI, but it's the solution architect agent
a lot of
that
syllables,
looks at and then you've got your requirements agent. I personally I'll give you here's a pitch. I think you need an ROI agent in Plan Designer that also basically starts to look at as those use cases that starts to give you those. But I'm interested in where your thoughts have gone. Like I made the running joke here in the office is there's going to be a project management agent as well, and that's just going to every half a day it's going to pop up and go. So have you done it yet? And then, where are you going with those?
Well, look, Microsoft overall, you'll start to see many more agents pop up. And for customers that aren't in the inner rings, even just in Teams out of the box, you see a facilitator agent that will pop into meetings and remind you when there's 15 minutes left and capture action items, and you can mention it like another attendee. In M365 Copilot, there's now really powerful agents like researcher and analyst.
It's amazing.
That are really good. And I can't now imagine working without researcher, and I've only been using it for a couple of months. By the way, I use it to create personalized podcasts based on internal documents, and then I listen to them on my commutes in the car. It's super cool. So that type of thing is going to become an increasingly common pattern. This idea of a digital coworker that shows up and an increasingly capable team of digital coworkers that show up and then work together and orchestrate together. And so I would say certainly expect that we will add agents to the party on all of these fronts. And even in plans, to your point, we have multiple agents already today. We'll also start to look at who coordinates across those agents. Are there agents that sort of manage the other agents? And are there other agents that come in? You're not the first to push us on things like ROI agent and establishing what did you do before? What was the cost and value of that? How is the solution going to improve? But then also think about it, if it's really a digital software team, after I deploy it? What about the agents that alert me when there's a problem, or alert me when people are using it, or bring me back into the solution to suggest that I do something better with it? It doesn't stop at the moment that I create the UX. It just is a starting point. And so you think through that whole life cycle of software, and you think about all of the labor that we put around that today. All of those are opportunities for agents to help augment and scale every part of the process. And so, we're not going to ship them all at once, but I think that is very much the goal is, how do you surround everybody with a digital innovation team? Even within the app agent, there are lots of specialties today. There's user experience specialists and design specialists and motion graphic specialists and, data integration specialists, so there's a lot of room for specialization. And for us, it's just getting the right cardinality. And it really comes down to a mechanics of what does it take to make an agent great? What level of focus, what level of post-training, what level of prompting and knowledge and independent evolution does that thing need? And then there's also what type of lifespan does it have? How does it interact with you on an ongoing basis beyond one interaction? And then that starts to map out, I think, a really rich future for how many agents we bring into the space.
So I'm hearing it, and you can confirm this, that basically if you holistically look at the end-to-end process of the life cycle of an application or a solution, anywhere where there is either friction or time or waste and opportunities for efficiency, you will probably either personify that process or the role that typically owns that part of the process and look to how you can incorporate that into the story. So the dog whistle I heard there just from what you said after deployment is there's going to be a lot of more agentic stuff on governance. And I was one of the OG folks who was around with COE, busting out flows that consume lots of resources. I can almost rethink COE. I could see a COE bunch of agents that are looking at a whole bunch of things about platform health.
Yeah, and look, Managed Platform is already doing this. Like the advisor in Managed Platform will already let you know, hey, Paul, you've got 3 apps that just lost their owner because somebody left the company. Do you want to quarantine them? Do you want to reassign them? That already is monitoring the environment and thinking about things. It's already describing apps, writing deployment notes when things move from dev to test to prod. It's already starting to work on your behalf, and that's why customers are investing in the Managed Platform as opposed to the open source COE kit and a bunch of manual labor. Is because it's actually allowing them to really scale their operation. We were at the European Power Platform conference last week. It was a public venue, so I can share it. But we told the story of Heineken, that serves tens of thousands of employees. The entire employee base of Heineken, over 100,000 people, can and do use Power Apps on a regular basis. They do it with less than 5 people in their central team, because they use the Managed Platform exclusively, and they've been able to automate a lot of these pieces of management. And so that is a pre-existing prior art that's in live today, but there's a lot of opportunities to go add more agents and more agent capabilities into that whole space.
Absolutely. And I think it's really, is it fair to say it's incumbent on Microsoft to realize the vision of the Managed Platform by doing that, right? Because that's how people 100%. Are going to scale and have the network effects that you spoke of earlier.
100%. Yeah. And again, that is an existential component to the ambition of, it's not just about build 1 or 2 or 3 things. It's really rethink hundreds or thousands of processes and pieces of software. You have to have a well-managed platform, and that has to not be managed through linear human effort if you're going to reach that scale in a reasonable amount of time and solve the actual problem that we have today, which is right now, there is no platform and there is no management because everything was built or bought as a unique butterfly.
Yep. So in the time we have left, because we're getting close to time, thank you for answering all of these questions. I have one last question that's both a very tactical question, but probably a precursor to our next conversation as well.
Okay.
So let's work backwards.
Sure.
We haven't really spoken. We talked about personas and how you agentify different personas to improve the productivity and the efficiency of certain processes in the delivery of software. Plan Designer is literally the poster child for that I think can really give people a visceral, tangible view of what that future, that emerging future looks like. So therefore, the roles that traditionally do those, there's the, we're back to the change management of roles. And, again, I don't think it's particularly controversial. I think you already alluded to it, that roles are going to change and the way we deliver things is going to change. So we're all in this period of great change, which creates uncertainty.
Yep.
We'll talk about that and maybe in detail the organizational aspects, because I'm certainly keen, as a teaser for next time. I want Ryan Cunningham. If Ryan Cunningham was CIO, how would Ryan Cunningham structure things if you weren't at Microsoft? So we'll leave that there. But the last question really is, from a tactical point of view, I can build agents in the M365 world, right? I have my Copilot license and I can do some basic agents there. And of course, I've got the Copilot Studio world. Can you maybe, that's an area definitely also of confusion, that folks, that when to use what, there's a bit of friction there. And I'm just wondering if you can give any hints or any, perhaps to the limit you can, where do you think that's going to go? That whole, the agent builder, the agent maker story.
Oh, yeah. Look, I think this does come back to, in a time of great change, there's lots of ways to build things and we shouldn't fret too much, like use the best tool for the job. But I think there is a very clear strategic direction to say, like, the extensibility mechanism and the platform for M365 Copilot is Copilot Studio. And that, even the agent builder experiences that pop up inside of SharePoint and Teams, those are minified versions of Copilot Studio. And in fact, you can even click to edit that whole agent in Copilot Studio. It creates an agent behind the scenes in Copilot Studio. So Studio is the way to add custom agents, customize agents. Now, yes, we have an SDK and there's pro dev ways to do it too, but that kind of reports back to that previous conversation of where are you going to get the most leverage? Where does it make sense to do it at the lower level and maintain it at the lower level versus do it at the higher level? And really, we see that Studio layer as being the way to get to scale. How do I get to lots of specialized agents and rev them quickly and have distributed ownership of them so I have subject matter experts increasingly making them better? We don't get to that scale just with SDKs and developer-facing tools alone. You have to sort of work at a higher level of abstraction to get to higher scale.
Yep. So is it fair to say then that the future is pretty much that, yes, you can build a basic agent in those experiences. So if you build a SharePoint agent that can talk to SharePoint, the minute you sort of want to expand its knowledge or delivery channels or surface it in different ways, all paths lead to Copilot Studio. And we're back to the managed platform that activates this.
100%. Yeah. And look, we're not that creative. This is exactly how Power Platform was bootstrapped out of SharePoint in 2016 and 2017. I could customize a SharePoint list inline using Power Apps, or I could create a simple triggered automation with Power Automate embedded. But then when I wanted to go build real standalone scaled software for real processes, I worked directly at powerapps.com or powerautomate.com. I built it. I used environments to ship it and deploy it. But it all worked on the same platform, and I could scale something up or I could create an asset and share it out. And that is very much a similar pattern that you're seeing emerge with Copilot Studio and Agent Builder embedded into some of those experiences.
Yep. And I guess in common with what you said earlier then, and there's a no cliff story, because when you do have the workloads that are worthy of your focus and attention, right? A crown jewel type of asset or critical or market leading innovation, you've got all of the power and flexibility of Azure to either augment what you're doing or do what you need to do.
Yeah, 100%. And one of the things we demoed at Build, not in the session that you're referencing, but even in the keynotes, was I can now take any model in Azure AI Foundry, even ones that I've custom post-trained or fine-tuned just for my company, and now use them in Copilot Studio and even target different models at different specific prompts and skills of a Copilot Studio agent. So I can have one agent that is, answers base questions on a 4.1 model, but then uses a fine-tuned version of DeepSeek for a specific prompt skill, and then uses a fine-tuned version of 5.4 for a different specific prompt skill. So I can get very granular about how I leverage those underlying assets. And I don't have to, sort of fall off a cliff when I need that extra level of extensibility. Yeah. Most simple SharePoint agents aren't going to need to ever deal with any of those buzzwords. But I think if I want a digital coworker that is processing refund requests at high volume, I am going to need to really think about how do I get from 10% effectiveness to 90% effectiveness to 95%. And usually that comes in that iteration and experimentation loop that is really enabled by a lot of those more powerful tools under the hood.
Cool. All right. So I think what we'll do in the next conversation, we might actually bring in some of these other parallel platforms as well,
Sure.
just to even broaden the story, because there's obviously the SharePoint Modern Work World, but there's Fabric. We didn't really touch on Fabric, which is another example of, I call that Power Platform for data. That's kind of my very simplistic, because again, it's the same pattern of abstraction.
Right.
So that might be worth talking about. And then let's talk a little bit about the how the cadences, the delivery approaches, the roles, and how IT departments might function. And that's emerging for all of us.
It's changing for us too, even in how we build and ship software. It's certainly changing for customers too. So
and Microsoft is a great leading indicator of how other organizations are going to work, right? So let's unpack a little bit more about that when we talk next time.
Happy to do it. Hey, this is really fun. I really appreciate the questions and chance to kind of monologues.
All good. So thanks very much for doing that. Really appreciate it. I think a lot of people get a lot of value out of that. So we'll see what the reaction's like.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it, Paul. Take care.
Thanks,
Talk
mate.
to you soon.
See ya.
Be well.
Bye.
Cheers.